Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Farnell, Operations Manager for the Saskatchewan Festival of Words, and welcome to our first event for LitCon this year. We are so excited to have another great lineup of programming, and we can't wait to explore it all with you. So tonight we are starting off with our first industry interview with David Barry, talking about money and how artists can make money, if artists can make money. So to start us off, I'm just going to read David's bio. So David Barry is a writer, editor, and critic. He spent the first 2 decades of his professional career profiling and critiquing the book, film, music, and theater scenes for an Edmonton-based alt weekly, and then did the same nationally for the National Post. He's contributed essays, criticism, and features to the Globe and Mail, the Walrus, CBC, Hazlitt, and many other places, some of which still exist. His first book on nostalgia was published in 2020, and his most recent book on how artists make money and how money make artists was released in October of last year. So thanks for joining us, David.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
So to begin, I think we need to start this off, I think, by saying this is probably going to be a little bit of a cynical seeming conversation because it is really difficult for artists to make money. And I think, we have to be honest with that up front. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you specifically about your book and about this topic, because I felt like you really balanced the line of of kind of like reality with a little bit of hope, a little bit of despair. We kind of go back and forth. Realistic. And I wanted to say a quote that stuck out to me was, "It might be fun for us to debate what really is an art form and which practitioners really are artists, but the answer bludgeons us with a cold simplicity. Art is what the people who pay for art say it is, and artists are the people they pay for it. Anything else is an argument search of a patron." And I really love that because it's so true. As much as we all want to make art and it be beautiful and everyone see it, the fact is money is the the center of most everything we do. And so I wonder if you could talk a bit about the realization that the majority of artists will not be financially successful, and how did that change your outlook on writing and making art?
Yeah. So it's weird because I think it's really one of those things that, but you don't really truly know until you get a chance to experience, right? Like I think there's kind of a classic like, oh yes, you're going to be a starving artist, the parent who tells you not to pursue an artistic career or something like that. But one of the realities is because the most visible artists in our world are naturally people who are wildly successful, right? Like I think we can get something of a blinkered view of it, or maybe just a misunderstanding in terms of like how big the range is between like person who fails or crashes out or just stops doing it versus rock star with a pool shaped like their face kind of thing, right? Like I think it was a slow realization over a long time, but it was really once I sort of had my first book out and realized um, sort of how little there was in it, but also that like that still constituted quite a success, right? Like I was kind of alarmed when I first saw those things, but then my publisher was sort of like, no, this is fantastic. Like you're doing great. This is like we are very very happy. And then to sort of sate my own ego, I also went and looked up various sales statistics and things like that to confirm it's like, oh, they're not just blowing sunshine. This is right. I'm doing actually pretty good. And so that idea that like the very little money I made on my first book, and just for the record, to date, it is something like I just got a new royalty check, so maybe it's slightly higher now, but it's about $3,000 for a book that took me two some years to write and has been out for several years now. So like it's alarming. And again, like I've done that is in terms of sales and things that is better than like two-thirds of the books that get published in North America. So, like, that's wild, and so there's kinda just a realization on my own part that it's like, "Okay, well, like, this cannot be." Like, not only can I not count on this as, like, how I'm gonna do it, it's like there has to be something else. I need to orient my life around sustaining this if it's something I want to take seriously and I want to pursue. Right? Like it's just like this isn't just something that's going to happen. If I do get in a position where this covers all my bills and gives me a reasonable lifestyle, right? Like um, I basically won the lottery. So what can I do that allows me to try to maintain some kind of standard of living? Because I don't need like a beach house or anything, but like I'd like to have a place to live and feed my
Yeah.
kids and like that kind of thing. So like what can I do to do that that also allows me the time and space I need to continue to write things. And I talk about this a bit in the book, but like that was a tough realization, or it's like a tough thing to accept and actually try to pursue because like as hard as it is to create things and do all that, there's a whole other layer of like, well, how do I balance like, yeah, say just straight up abandoning my children for a while so I can go write a book, or it's like, or putting my entire family in a worse position than I might otherwise be in just because I have a dream, or and like 100 questions like that, right? Like what am I actually willing to sacrifice for this? And they're easier when it's just yourself. It gets a little trickier when you start thinking about the various implications for the people in your life too. So
Yeah, like what a daunting prospect to think of. And we'll get into like the different kind of income streams and different things that you talk about in the book. But when you come to that realization about the reality of being a writer and you decide like I need to figure out something to do in order to sustain myself, where did you start? What did how do you there's so many things out there, so many options, and what was the first thing that you decided that was important for you to try to figure out how to sustain yourself as a writer?
well, I think so. I was lucky, to whatever degree you can say that, to have essentially started like in a working world where writing was some kind of option. And like basically the entire reason I became a journalist and critic and all those things was because I needed a job, and this that seemed like the one where I could write seemed like a good job to have, right? Like that seemed like a great idea. And so, like down the road, as I kind of like have tried to focus more on other kinds of writing, that's been a great advantage to have that. That like I always kind of have that in my back pocket. Although the opportunities for that have dwindled tremendously, even in just the amount of time I've been doing it. Like I started my career in 2006, and as kind of alluded to in my bio, most of the jobs I have had in my career just no longer exist. Most of the places I have wrote for no longer exist, which is kind of wild. So so yeah, like having that kind of natural thing that leans into writing, that it's just like it's a slightly different form of writing, was huge, and I'd strongly recommend that to people as an option, just because like it's a great way to get those practice reps in without also starving,
Mhm.
and you give yourself the time and space, and just especially like what I was doing in terms of writing about art and thinking about art and talking to artists obviously was wonderful for that, because I had permission to actually just go read or watch a movie and think about it and think about how I would do things like that, or what was important about them. But beyond that too, I'd say like even now in my where I am in my career, if I'm choosing something, it's usually with the my first sort of thought is like, okay, well, how much other time does this give me, right? Like, I'm just not like going to go for a job that's 60 plus hours or got wild, weird things, it's just not a consideration. It's more like, is this is this part-time and reasonable? Is it, and so that's even where something like teaching or something comes in, right, too, where it's just like, depending on the kind of teaching you're doing, you can kind of choose your hours and it's related to the field and things like that. So, um, but like with all that said, it's it's not easy. I just because I have the privilege of being someone who grew up in a world where there were more jobs like this and there were more opportunities like that, it's kind of alarming how much those opportunities have shrank even from when I started, like I said. Not to be too bleak, but
I think it's you have to be realistic, and sometimes being realistic is a little bleak, especially when it comes to the loss of newspapers and journalism in the world. It's something that we've talked about for a long time, and I think it's come up more and more, especially recently. So yeah, there's not there's not much you can say about that, but
no.
so to get into a little bit about kind of possible income streams for a writer, one of the first things that we know that people do when they write a book or maybe self-publish a book, they bring it to us and pitch us on coming to the festival and a lot on events and making money on events. And so I want to start off with this because I will be the first to admit we do not give you enough money for for the work that you are doing. It's a conversation we have in the arts world a lot about how little writers get paid for talking about their books and writing their books. So I just wanted to go into a little bit of like how much do like event honorariums contribute to your income and do you can you expect to be invited to a lot of places? Like what are some expectations as a writer for being invited as a speaker?
So there's a couple, I guess, different ways to think about that, and really a couple different sort of tiers. Um, the reality is for like events like this, which are I would say unreservedly my favorite, by which I mean like literary focused events, right? Like everyone who's showing up is probably a reader and maybe a writer, and they care about all that stuff. Like there is just no way to count on that. Sadly, like I'd love to. I'd like some, once a book comes out, you can maybe expect a few, maybe not always. But it's just like it's so irregular and so strange, and honestly, so often the payment of any kind is more like, "Hey, we will fly you out to this city, and you can come talk, and we'll give you a hotel room." And like, and it's like, and that's cool. I love to travel. I love to meet people. So that's great. But like, that is obviously not, I cannot, the bank will not accept I got to do a cool thing at any point. So like, honestly, like I certainly once you get to some level, you could rely on it a bit. But like once you're at that level, you're probably not too worried about how much your honorarium is for an event anyway. So then there's two other kind of levels to think about, but both of them kind of require extra work and are not guaranteed. So one is like what you might call the trade show kind of circuit. This, I mean, for starters, I just write the wrong kind of books to get into that thing, frankly. But like, if you're a business book person or a self help person or yeah, memoir kind of, sometimes you've got an inspiring story. Like this is kind of like giving a TED talk to like a bunch of teachers or something like that, and that can be somewhat lucrative, but again, like that is a side business that you need to pursue, right? It can be related to what you are doing and whatever, but like you will need to find contacts and get in with the right people who book these kinds of things and pursue it. Probably even you might need like a speaking agent for that kind of thing. So with that said, those usually do pay more. Like, sometimes you can get like, even if you're not like a household name, even like, 500 to $1,000 a pop, plus they'll cover all your expenses and stuff. And those happen all the time, all over the place. So like, but again, like you can't just write a book and throw it out there and start to get in there. You need to pursue that. And then there's like the even bigger one, which is like, keynote addresses and shareholder meetings and all this. But that's like that is absolutely professional. That is people who are essentially brands, part of which involves writing a book, and the other part of which involves going to these big speaking engagements. And like for lack of a better term, you basically need to be a celebrity, and even a book celebrity kind of person, right? Like New York Times #1 bestseller type. And then even then too, usually like you have to be writing about things or subjects that kind of um, align with what those are looking for. So again, like inspiring memoir, business strategies, just things like that. Sometimes, again, like if you're Margaret Atwood or whatever, you'll get invited for speaking engagements wherever and get a lot of money for it. But again, Margaret Atwood does not need that that cash, right? It's just a nice perk of things she can do to get by without writing, right? So, but yeah, the sad reality is just like events. They can pay okay, but it's just like they're not reliable enough to make that it's really something you do more because it's fun, and then it's sort of like a cool bonus when they pay you. Which is, I will say, as one little tip, it's important to have cool bonuses in in your life and career. It makes it like if you're relying on $300 to get by, that is rough. If you get $300 out of nowhere, that's amazing. You can do all kinds of fun things with that money, right? Like so, it does make everything that much better if you can get into a position where you can just enjoy that and not worry about where it comes from too often.
Yeah, that's I love that answer, and I love the perspective of thinking of that kind of thing as a bonus. Uh, I think arts, you kind of really have to sometimes work to make sure that you are still enjoying what you're doing, and so having that kind of mentality is going to take you far, right? And I think that's what a lot of successful writers have, is that perspective of like, this is cool.
For sure. Well, I do think it's actually really important to consider it as like the perks of the job, right? Like
Mhm.
it just like the reality of writing is that you're usually alone, and not making a lot of money and sort of hiding away. And so like this, but like it's really cool that like people want to hear you talk or something like that. That is really fun, and it's important, I think, to make space for that and like appreciate it too, because again, there are plenty of jobs that pay a lot more money, but you don't get to do cool stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to transition to our next question, which we've talked about going to events, and now kind of I feel like a lot of the holy grail for a lot of writers is the writer in residence position.
Mm.
And I know that you have worked as a writer in residence before. So for people who are dreaming of this gig, how does someone go about getting a job in something like a writer in residence program? Is it all that it's cracked up to be? You know, is it is it useful for you or for your income?
Um, it it's really fun. I enjoy. I'm like actually currently a writer in residence, so and it's really wonderful because it's sort of like it's kind of like being an academic, but only for a brief time and whatever. But so it's like almost all of them involve some time to write, right? Like you're there, and then usually some kind of mentorship or teaching a class or something like that. And it's wonderful to like be able to just spend all your time one way or another thinking about writing, helping other people with it, and helping other people can be a wonderful like helps you sort of solve your own problems and think about your own things. And so like it's great. It's like if the absolute dream is just getting to do this, entirely like just write and never worry about anything else, then like this is 1B, right? Like so, but like with that said, like I only got the position I did because I had wrote 2 books. I had I have put in a lot of um, volunteer, essentially volunteer time, mentoring people, or showing up at things, running a workshop, running an event. I had another job that involved just like event planning and running that I think absolutely helped because just a big part of the position I'm currently at involves doing programming like that, like for 20, 30 people, a workshop like that. That was important to them. It's like it, I wouldn't quite call it like a crown jewel or something like that, but it is not. I didn't send them a resume and say I like writing. Can I teach other people how to write? Like it was a very competitive process. Other person, so I'm one of two in my position right now, and the other person had applied for the position 10 years in a row and
Wow.
just got it. So like just and again that and she's somebody who has, I think 4 or 5 publications to her name and again a similar background to me in terms of like workshops and volunteer. So like it's great, but it's like it's absolutely not a thing you step into. Like you need a body of work. You need to be like a mid-career, late career sort of person to get a position like that. Um, and so, yeah, like I would put it up as a goal. I think that honestly, it was a goal for me for like 4 or 5 years, honestly, right? So it's like that kind of thing where it's wonderful when it happens, absolutely worth pursuing, but is not is not coming anytime soon, right? Like, and so just keep in mind, and like not to keep banging the same drum too, but like think of it as like it's a good potential perk really. It's a job, like it's a full-on job, but it's again the kind of opportunity that could come if you devote yourself to this, but it's by no means something that is imminent or promised to anyone. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think, I think there's so many people that want to be writers, and talking about the competitiveness of trying to get into a writer in residence. It's the same thing about trying to get into events. Like the festival alone, we are pitched over 200 books a year from writers, and so there's just so much out there and so many people that are really talented. And to talk a bit more about competitiveness is talking about grants and government grants. And I think sometimes new artists have this perception that you apply for a grant and you'll get it, and it's kind of free money for the taking. But I appreciated the way that you talked about grants in your book and the reality of grants, and that they are great, and they're, if you can get them, they're amazing. But it's not always easy. And one thing that stood out to me was talking about how specifically your book didn't fit into the idea of nonfiction that government grants that you were applying to wanted to support. And so, like,
yeah,
can you talk a bit about the realization that even nonfiction, they have like a very specific idea of what is supportable and what is kind of niche and not being funded.
for sure. Well, so I get that there's maybe two thoughts on that, but the first one, just to like talk about my situation specifically, was you know, my stuff is researched. It's like I wouldn't quite call it journalism or anything like that, but it is like it's not really memoirish. This book ended up memoirish, but it's straight ahead, factual, deeply researched, creatively written, I think, but nonetheless, a certain type of nonfiction. And yeah, the feedback I got from one specific granting body was that it just didn't seem artistic enough the way I, presented this, that it was something else, I guess I've researched. And this is or has been a consistent issue for at least a decade or so, especially in Canada, that like, that kind of type of nonfiction, history would maybe be sort of like a classic example, right? Like, is just not, it has some trouble getting funding from arts bodies because it's not artistic. It's something else. It's academic. It's history, it's whatever. And so like half of your battle is just, at least if you're doing this kind of thing, convincing people that your approach is somehow more whatever that is. And again, so usually the vogue is sort of for memoir, for personal stories, for creative nonfiction in that vein. Um, and but I mean, like, which speaks to, I guess, the second half of this, which is sort of maybe the more consistent issue. M- Time might come when my particular type of nonfiction is what people are looking for. I hope as soon as possible, right? Um, but like that's just part of the issue is that these things are, personal. They're political. They're driven by trends and style and like there is no universal criteria for what is art and what is deserving and what is whatever. And honestly, like often advice you will get from particularly public granting bodies is like, look, just because you didn't get this one doesn't mean you shouldn't apply again because yeah, next time it's going to be, five different people who are judging your thing and they might have a completely different view of it. And that's kind of just one of the hardest things is like there isn't a formula for there isn't like there are sort of like hints and tips and tricks you can follow that sort of help, but like it just comes down to who's in that room and what they think and what their biases are and so yeah, like it can be, I think it can just be really discouraging, the realization that like I I don't mean to sound just like that this was discouraging for me, but like the truth of the matter is I put basically the same application in to three different granting bodies. One of them gave it to me, wonderful. One of them said it's like, this is nice, but it's just like there's other stuff we'd rather fund. And then the third one was like, this isn't art, we're not giving you money. So and it's just and like that's the reality of it, that there is no like formula or straightforward thing. You can put in a lot of work, you can shape it and everything, and you just might get the wrong roll of the dice. And that, yeah, like I don't know, that is a tough and kind of frustrating thing, especially because it's like all of this grant work comes on top of like even once I got the grant, which was wonderful, I still had to go actually do all this stuff, right? Like I still had to write the book. That was all just a sideline thing to help me do it. So yeah, it's kind of a baffling, weird process. And then oh sorry, I guess I'll also say too, like, and this gets into something like the success rate for any individual grant is, it ranges, but it is like universally less than 25%, and often more like 10. So just like
Mhm.
about 10% of everyone who applies to a grant are the people who are getting it. So yeah, like 80 to 90% of the people just aren't going to get the grant, period. And like having sat on juries and stuff like that, some of that is because people are really half-assing it and not trying and like are just like, please give me money, period, send. But like most of it, they are fabulous proposals. They're great people. They look like, they're solid on paper. It's just like there was just another project that they liked a bit more, and that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, you're so right. I've also sat on some juries as well, and that's one thing that stuck out to me is going on there, and there's so many great projects out there, and there's so many great things that you want to fund, and then they tell you, well, you can only fund this,
Yeah.
and and also when you're on a jury with a bunch of people, I found my opinions on certain projects varied wildly from other people's opinions on it too. So it is really kind of the luck of the draw of who you have
Hmm.
uh, adjudicating it and that sort of thing. Um, and to talk more about grants, specifically government grants, or we could get a little bit more into private grants too, although I have a question about that later. I wonder if you could just kind of go through the process of applying for a grant, because I feel like some people don't necessarily understand the amount of work that can sometimes go into these things. And something specifically that you had mentioned was how oftentimes when you're going for a professional grant, you need to prove that you have some sort of professional capacity, whether that's having already published a book or having already been hired to do an event, or some sort of indicator that you have the professional capacity to complete whatever project that you're going for. So I wonder if you could just talk a bit about the granting process.
For sure, yeah. So yeah, I mean that is one of the biggest things to consider before you even apply for a grant is what are those criteria in terms of what they want you to be able to prove. Because like it and it's like it can feel a bit unfair, but in fairness, they want to make sure that you can do what it is you say you're going to do. But the reality is that that can be very harsh in terms of like what you have actually done. And so there are some grants that are specifically for emerging artists, say. So that's people who maybe don't have much in the way of published work or something like that. But most of them still want you to prove that you've pursued this in a meaningful way. So that means had something published in a literary magazine, like, or you pursued it in school at the very least, like, right? You have a BA or ideally probably an MA in creative writing or some kind of field. You can talk about what you're doing pretty clearly and explicitly. You can lay out what it looks like to do that. So it's just like, um, for instance, like I've been told. So again, I have 20, a little over 20 years of writing experience in journalism and various things. I have published two nonfiction books. I have received a Canada Council grant. I have been told explicitly that I should not bother applying for a grant for fiction writing because I just won't get it because I just don't I don't have like short stories published in literary magazines, or I never took any, it's like I haven't done any academic stuff on it. So it doesn't matter that I know how to write. There's nothing that sort of suggests that I could write fiction. So just don't do it. Um, like that's realistically kind of how harsh it is, right? That like you need direct proof that you can do the thing you want to do. So that's the start. And then like on top of that, you also need uh and some of these things are things that like this is where the formula and the tips and tricks comes in. So it's like you need to know how to budget. You need to know how to figure out what it is going to cost you to do all these things. For writers, that's usually pretty easy, fortunately, because all we really need is like time and maybe like some travel or something to do research. So we have that fortunate, but still, like you need to figure that out line by line. And it's like transportation costs, housing costs, childcare costs. Like some of them even will ask for groceries and stuff like that. Like, and then on top of that too, you need like usually a fairly detailed, and if not detailed, at least like well thought out and considered project proposal for, and like it's not just like, yeah, I'm gonna write a book about artists and money and see what's up. It's like, no, no, no. Like, how are you going to research this? What avenues are you going to pursue? Why? How do we know that you will actually stick to this and do this? Yeah, and then usually there's another one too that will sort of ask you a little bit about yourself or what the project means to you or what kind of impact you think the project will have on either yourself or wider society, which is another like little mini essay you have to come up with. And then you have to do that every single time you want a grant. Like you can kind of port some over, but they're usually just different enough that you're going to have to spend some time every single time. So yeah, they're not like there is a reason that people exist. Not that I would recommend any of you employ them, but there is a job that is just writing grants, right? Like, and there's a reason it's a job. It's a lot of work, and yeah, you need to have a really clear idea of what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and ideally know how to sell yourself enough to a bunch of other artists. And so, yeah, it's not like that's part of the reason why they are so hard to get is that there's so many ways you can trip up on this. Yeah, so they're worth pursuing. They're wonderful support, but like you know, consider it like I think it took me a year just to get a grant. and then 2.5 to 3 years to like actually research and write the book. So a quarter of my time was spent trying to figure out whether I could just find support for this book. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. I you had talked a bit about private grants in your book as well, and I wanted to know if you found that working with like foundations and private institutions, was that easier than a government grant, or was that how did that differ?
I think sort of the biggest thing is that private grants can be much more of a black box than government grants. Like, say what you will about the weird process and stuff, they are pretty forthcoming about how they go about things. Governments are, and like they all have officers who will help you, talk you through the process, who might provide some kind of feedback. They can never be too specific, but can sort of give you guidance on how to reapply and things like that. Private grants don't really have to do any of that stuff. um, but the one big advantage is that they show tendencies in a way that public grants just rarely do. So like either they'll just come right out and say it like, hey, this is a grant for comics creators or, sci-fi or whatever. Or you can just, if you do a little bit of research, you can kind of look and see, and it's just like, oh, they seem to love, deeply researched books about, history or whatever. Yeah, like, and so you can kind of pick out their tendencies. So if you have like, yeah, if you're looking to write a sci-fi book, well, great. There are sci-fi specific grants, and they will often sort of like tip their hand a little bit about specifically what kind of stuff they're looking for. Just the other side of that, though, too, is that like they don't. Some of them do, some of them don't, but they don't require the same level of like distance that public grants do. Like, so a public grant jury is just like essentially randomly selected from artists in the area who apply for it. But it's a totally, whereas like private grants, it's more of like it's more carefully selected, and oftentimes is like a consistent jury from year to year because it's their money and they can do what they want with it. So that can work to your advantage in terms if you can figure out what it is they're after and that aligns with what you're trying to do. But yeah, it can also just be like that for private grants in particular. That's where it's like your hardest work should be in selecting the grant to apply for in the first place, because if yeah, there's a really good chance they wouldn't fund what you do no matter what, and you can figure that out before you go through all the work of actually trying to apply for it.
Yeah, but that's there's so many things to consider when looking into that stuff, and to move on from grants. The big thing that a lot of people that I know are talking about is trying to get into something like a Patreon or a YouTube following to try to splash up money that way.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not necessarily something that lends itself easily to writers. But I wonder if you could talk a bit about um, different artistic pursuits using, because you talk about that in the book as well,
Mhm.
about them using that kind of thing, and if you think that that sort of uh, if there's ways that artists and writers could use those sort of tools to monetize their work, or if there's any other ways that you found successful of promoting yourself or being able to make money that way.
Sure, yeah. Well, I should say, yeah. So it is kind of unfortunate that um, these methods do seem to have helped other art forms a lot more than writers, like visual artists. Stuff just like lends itself a bit better. Film and things like that. It's just that we're, again, not to get too bleak, but maybe arguably moving towards a post-literate society. So never been a better time to point a camera at yourself, though. Yeah. So, I think, especially for writers, these things are kind of a really double-edged sword. And so, on the good side of things, you can find an audience for niche things that never ever previously would have made it through sort of like the gatekeepers of classic publishing and things like that, right? And so there's 100 examples, but I mean, even just like romance is a fabulous example. Romance was already a big category before the internet came along, but then like the rise of things like AO3 and these other sort of fans like have like opened the floodgates. And so again, like I guess like heated rivalry. Sorry, not to like I know it's still kind of the hot thing, but anyway, like that's something that just almost certainly would have never found an audience before. You wouldn't have come to a publisher with like, I have a weird, gay hockey player thing. Will you print, 20,000 copies of this? They just wouldn't have, they wouldn't have, it wouldn't have cracked through. But you can go on this forum, it can find its audience, right? It can like the inherent qualities and writing and stuff can shine through. And then you can show someone like, look, people are interested in this, and you can pursue a more classic thing. You could just like go, yeah, put it up on a Patreon or a Substack or something like that and charge people a couple bucks a month, and some of them will happily pay it. um, and like that applies to any number of kind of niche topics, things that never so like that's a great opportunity. And like it's great too because it doesn't necessarily take that many people to get an okay living, right? Like if you can convince 1,000 people to give you $2 a month, you're not, again, no beach houses, but you'll be able to like build a solid base. The other side of that sword, though, is that even getting to 1,000 people willing to give you $2 a month is years of work, right? Like the stats in terms of, and again, these aren't specific to writers, but just like in terms of like YouTube channels or Substacks or Spotify, okay, like the number of people who reach even just like 1,000 followers, never mind 1,000 followers who want to give you money, is really stark. It's it's like less than 10%. Honestly, on usually less than 5 or 2. So like, and like you can do it. People do it obviously all the time, but like it's a full time pursuit in and of itself. And it's a thing too that requires, especially in the case of writing, dedicated stuff written just for that medium. A visual artist can just like take pictures of their paintings and build up an Instagram following and maybe do whatever. For a writer, like you can't pull an excerpt out of your book and post it on Blue Sky and expect anything to happen to that. You can't, it's like you can write a whole chapter or a whole short story every week and post that somewhere, and then make sure you're cross posting it to another place, and then make sure that you're publicizing it, and then make sure that you're responding to the comments from everyone who's coming in, because actually building a community is a huge part of this too. And that can become really lucrative. I talk about one writer, a, and I should say a terrible writer, but nonetheless a very successful writer who's seems to be making $60,000 a month on Patreon. Now, granted, they publish a chapter of that book every single day, and they again engage with that community every single day. They're putting in like 8 to 10 hours of work a day at least, I assume, just on this. But like again, they're not doing anything else. That's their full time job, and so you can do these things, and there's more opportunity for doing these things, and there's even more like weird, I there's a whole subset of people who have YouTube channels that are doing like film criticism, and they're film writers, and it's this weird, but like it's not an addendum. It's a full on other job that you have to take on. um, but again, like the opportunity and the reward there is that like you can, especially if you're doing something that seems a little outside of the mainstream or that appeals to people in a way that more standard classic coming of age novel or something might not. Uh, you can find that audience. It's just like it's a job to find that audience too. So yeah, it's something to consider. It does seem like an interesting way going forward just because it can help like 100,000 different communities as opposed to just like one or two people. But, if you're going to do that, understand too that it's not just, you don't just like fire up the Patreon and watch it trickle in. Like you have to devote yourself to feeding that particular beast.
Yeah, I have a question that you made me think of, but before we get to that, we're coming to the end of the hour, and so I just wanted to let the audience know we're open to any questions that you have. So if you have any, put them in the chat, and I'll make sure that David gets them asked. And so we had talked. I had primed you on this on talking about AI previously, but I kind of want to change my question into how did COVID change the way you not necessarily write, but do business as a writer? I guess you've got the rise of AI. You do have things like more people in fandom and being online and being in the Patreon space and YouTube space as well. And so, how did that change kind of pre and post COVID for you?
Hmm. I think the main thing COVID sort of did was just like intensified or, like hyper intensified, honestly, a lot of trends that you could like were trickling in over kind of the previous decade, then just like blew up full on. And so, yeah, so there had been online spaces. I mean, honestly, there had been online communities of, for 20 or 30 years before
Hmm.
this. But all of a sudden, this became the only way people could interact with the world to a large degree. So all of a sudden, there was just this huge flood of potential. And so, in some ways, it was fantastic. Like you've just got ways to meet with people that people consider normal now. Like again, Discord was there, and there were ways you could do this, but like the audience for that was somewhat limited, and it was people who were already fairly online to begin with. Now you have like it's not outside the norm for someone to to be engaged on like an online message board or yeah to like follow a bunch of things on Patreon or be part of a Discord for with people from all over the world. So that was a big one. The other thing too, and like we're starting to see this come back a bit, was because it blew up like in-person art forms in such a like distinct way. Like you couldn't go see a band, you couldn't go see a movie in the theaters, like you couldn't go do anything. It did kind of open up briefly those like things that you could just do online. And I think like legitimize that a lot for people that like, oh, you know what, there's like a 2 hour, weird documentary on YouTube that's really well done. And I get like I this is just as much fun as going to see, a Marvel movie or something. um, so like I think that was just the biggest thing. It just kind of like hyper concentrated. But that I do think like the normalizing that and turning that has, I think, really sort of contributed to stuff like the rise of AI, where now it's just like people don't, for good and ill, just don't really see any particular difference or barrier between something that is happening online and the real world or some more legitimate thing, right? Like it's kind of all just content now. And there are really, really dark implications of that in that like it's all content. So it's all just like something to fill your face and mind with and move on. Um, but then at the same time too, like it allows you to, you there's even more examples now of people who have started online and then transition that into sort of more classic forms of making art or use that as their entry into like classic publishing or something like that. And that feels good, especially because so often it is like coming from communities and people that would have otherwise been marginalized or overlooked, or you don't necessarily have to live like in the same apartment building in New York to be noticed now, right? Like you can find ways in there, which is that's cool. That's helpful. It's just like you're also then competing with all 7 billion other people at once.
That's true
And
as
yeah,
well.
yes, and half of them are just like all they want to do is post pictures of stuff they bought, not make art. But yeah, so
Very true. We have a question from the audience. How do you find those volunteer roles to mentor other younger writers and build that skill for a literary CV?
oh yeah, that's a great question. If you are in school or near school, there's almost always going to be opportunities to reach out for that, even just through like clubs and things like that. If you have here in Alberta, or we have the Writers Guild, which has an opportunity for like they have events and chances to meet with people and get into mentorships like that. I believe Saskatchewan has a Writers Guild
Yes, we
too, so
do.
that's worth looking into. Yeah, and I think like the biggest thing with that is just finding your writing community too. Like whether that's just like you and 4 or 5 of your friends who get together and swap stories and notes every so often, or yeah, like reaching out to established ones in your area. There's or like online ones. Speaking of which, because yeah, that will give you that kind of opportunity to meet other people, to find out about weird little opportunities that I don't know about in your area, but also to just like to they will introduce you to other writers, and it doesn't take long for you to be sort of like the old hand who can give people help, and that's mentorship. It's like that's all there is to it, right? So it's really yeah, it's just getting involved with those kinds of groups will be a huge help on that. And then sometimes it's a little bit just like selling that, right? Were you talking to a friend about a story, or were you mentoring a friend about?
I've had to do that kind of creative writing as well in grants and that too.
That is, it's the same as like any resume, right? Like
Yeah.
it's always the best possible version of whatever it is you did.
Yes,
So
it
yeah.
definitely you definitely learn how
Yeah.
to spin things
Mhm.
in a more positive light.
Yeah.
We don't have any more questions right now, but if anyone else has anything, just put it in the chat and I'll make sure to ask. But to kind of wrap this whole thing up, we've spent this whole interview kind of in a bleak world where we're just talking about money, 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 and I think our artists and those of us in the arts don't necessarily always want to talk about money. So to finish this off, how would you say that you can define success without talking about money?
I really think that success is just doing it. Is it's just doing the thing. Getting to the point like a question I've gotten more than once after this book was sort of like, if it's so hard for you, why don't you just go write something commercial? Yeah, go write a gay hockey romance or whatever. Go write a true crime book or something like that. And there's 1,000 reasons why I don't do those things, but one of them is that it's really hard to write a book. Like it is not easy. It is hard emotionally. It is hard physically. It is hard mentally. Um, and so like success is getting through it, getting it out, getting a story out. Um, that is like the biggest battle that puts you ahead of so many other people just being able to do it. And then then it's just kind of like pleasing your people. I talk. It is worthwhile for mentoring and career advancement and whatever, but like finding a community of people who you respect, who you like being around, who you're excited by their ideas and interested in what they have to do, and then they are also excited by your ideas and interested in what you have to do. Like it's incredible. I really think why we do all of this, whether or not we admit that or realize that about ourselves. And so like that I think is ultimately what I think of as success. It's just like I've got a great group of people who I respect and love, and who I think are wonderful. And so if something I make resonates with them, that then great, then yes. And if I can also turn that into a living somehow, icing on the cake.
I think that's a perfect way to end it. Thank you, David, for being here today and going through your experiences with making money and or not making money in the artist world. I definitely recommend everyone purchase or get from the library David's book, How Artists Make Money and How Money Makes Artists. It's funny, it's insightful. I really enjoyed reading it, and not a how to, but definitely it gives you a lot of thought about how we look at art and how we experience the world. So, yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for